You're not stuck because you're lost. You're stuck because nothing is wrong enough to make you move. And you've been using that as permission to stay exactly where you are. You wake up most days already negotiating with yourself, not about big decisions, about energy, about timing, about whether today is the day you actually lean forward instead of hovering. You think carefully. You wait. You tell yourself you're being responsible, not hesitant. But deep down, you know the truth. You keep postponing the parts of your life that would require you to show up without certainty. You don't feel unhappy. That's the problem. You feel muted, like you're watching your own life slightly from the side, participating just enough to say you're fine, but not enough to feel inside it. You overanalyze small choices because they feel safer than committing to a direction. You replay moments that weren't failures, just moments you didn't step into fully. And when nothing dramatic goes wrong, you take that as proof that waiting was the right move. There's a pattern here, something subtle, something that sounds reasonable when it speaks. It doesn't yell at you. It doesn't scare you. It calmly reminds you that now isn't urgent, that other people have it worse, that disrupting your life without a real reason would be dramatic. So you listen. You choose comfort that looks like maturity, stability that quietly drains your momentum, distractions that feel earned instead of chosen. And week after week, you promise yourself you'll deal with this feeling when it becomes an actual problem. But it never does. That's the trap. Nothing collapses. Nothing forces your hand. Your life keeps working, just not expanding. Time moves forward, and you move laterally. You start trusting your thoughts more than your actions. You stop expecting follow-through from yourself because, technically, nothing is demanding it. The most uncomfortable part isn't regret. It's the quiet awareness that you're becoming someone who waits, someone whose future is shaped by what they avoid disrupting. You don't hate your life. You just don't feel claimed by it. And every time you ignore that, a small piece of self-trust erodes. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to notice in quiet moments. Sunday nights, empty mornings. The second after plans get canceled and you feel relief, then guilt. This isn't about motivation. It's about honesty. Because once you see what's actually keeping you here, you can't unsee it. And walking away now would mean letting that voice keep deciding for you without ever being named. Stay with this. You need to understand what's really been running your life before you decide what to do next. You probably think you already know what the problem is. You think you lack discipline. You tell yourself, you just need to lock in, stop overthinking, and finally push through. That's the story you've been using for years. But here is the uncomfortable truth. If the problem were discipline, you would have solved it by now. If it were laziness, it would show up as avoidance, not as the exhausting mental effort you spend every day. If it were fear, it would feel loud. But this is quiet. This is calm. The real issue isn't that you can't move. It's that something inside you keeps deciding that now is not the moment. And it does it so intelligently that you mistake it for wisdom. Look at how it shows up in your actual days. The small moments. You open a note to start something meaningful. A project, a script, a message. You type a few lines, then you stop. Not because you're blocked, but because a voice whispers, I should think this through a bit more. So you save it. You close it. You tell yourself you'll come back when the vision is clearer, but you don't. Or you decide to change your routine, but you don't rush into it. You research, you watch videos, you read threads, you collect perspectives. It feels productive. It feels responsible, but weeks pass and nothing changes. You delay small decisions, not because they're hard, but because they're irreversible. You keep your options open to avoid committing to a version of yourself you can't undo. You call it patience. But patience implies movement over time. What you're doing is waiting. This internal enemy doesn't scream, don't try. It whispers, not yet. It doesn't stop you from acting entirely. It just makes sure you never act fully. You half-start things. You soft commit. You keep the exits visible. And every time you hesitate, This enemy rewards you. That's the part most people miss. It pays you. It gives you a subtle emotional payoff. The feeling of being the kind of person who thinks things through. You get to feel careful instead of exposed, prepared instead of vulnerable. You don't look impulsive. You look sensible. But the cost doesn't hit all at once. It erodes. You start noticing that your confidence doesn't come from action anymore. It comes from potential, from what you could do, from who you'd be once things finally line up. And quietly, without drama, your self-trust weakens. Because deep down, you know the pattern. Every goal starts with clarity seeking. Every clarity seeking turns into delay. Every delay resets the cycle. Think back to your non-decisions, the ideas you never shared because they weren't fully formed, the version of yourself you kept developing but never released. You didn't quit those things. You postponed them indefinitely, and postponement feels innocent. It doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like caution. That's why this is so effective. It doesn't attack your dreams. It protects you from the discomfort of claiming them. Because the moment you choose, really choose, you lose something. You lose the fantasy version where everything works out perfectly. You lose the excuse of, I haven't really tried yet. So you stay in rehearsal mode, always refining, always almost ready, never exposed to the reality that growth requires friction. Before you think about where you're going, look back. Not with regret, with accuracy. Think about the last few years, not the highlights or the crises, the ordinary years, the ones where nothing went wrong. Notice something uncomfortable. Very little collapsed, but very little actually moved. The years didn't disappear. They were spent quietly, responsibly, safely. Time didn't betray you. It waited. And you avoided choosing. Now look at what that's done to your relationship with yourself. Every time you told yourself, I'll come back to this, and didn't, something small shifted. You didn't fail publicly. You didn't disappoint anyone else. But internally, you started adjusting your expectations downward. You stopped assuming follow through. You stopped trusting your own urgency. You stopped believing your intentions were binding. This is how confidence actually erodes, not through big failures, but through repeated self-betrayal that no one else sees. Ambition doesn't vanish, it dulls. It turns into analysis, then into hesitation, then into commentary about timing and readiness. You still think of yourself as capable, but you no longer feel authoritative inside your own life. Because identity isn't who you imagine yourself to be. It's who your behavior keeps confirming, right? Now, your behavior is teaching you something very specific. That comfort gets priority. That clarity is optional. That waiting is acceptable. Over time, that lesson sinks deep. You begin to identify as someone who almost acts, someone who understands more than they execute. This isn't a dramatic loss. It's quieter than that. You're losing inner sharpness, the ability to choose without overthinking, the willingness to tolerate uncertainty. You feel it when someone else makes a bold move, and it stings more than it inspires. You feel it when opportunities appear and your first instinct is to explain why now isn't ideal. You feel it when you hesitate to speak with conviction. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you're no longer sure you'll back yourself. This is the invisible loss. Not money, not status, inner authority. And here's the part most people miss. This isn't caused by a lack of time. It's caused by a pattern of delay that feels responsible. I'll start when things calm down. I just need more clarity. These aren't excuses, they're protections. They protect you from the discomfort of choosing without guarantees. But they quietly transfer control of your life to circumstances. You're not deciding anymore. You're waiting for permission that never arrives. The most dangerous fantasy here is not failure. It's believing you still have time by default. That urgency will eventually feel justified. But look backward again. How many times did someday already arrive and pass without announcement? Nothing collapsed. Which is exactly why this pattern survives. If you keep choosing comfort over clarity, nothing will explode, but something will finalize. Your self-image will settle, not as someone who could, but as someone who didn't. And once that identity hardens, change doesn't feel scary. It feels unrealistic. There's something important to notice before anything else. You've been trying to change the visible parts of yourself, your behavior, your habits, without realizing how much effort you've already been spending underneath. You weren't avoiding change. You were over-managing it, fighting thoughts, policing motivation, trying to force alignment instead of understanding the pattern underneath it. Here's the reframe. The problem was never that you weren't trying hard enough. It's that you were trying in the wrong direction. You've probably been told that discipline is something you lack. But look more closely. You show discipline every day in how consistently you choose comfort over friction, in how reliably you postpone decisions, in how carefully you maintain stability. You are already disciplined, just not toward the outcome you want. Let that sit for a moment. This isn't an insult. If discipline already exists, then nothing needs to be installed. It only needs to be redirected. And redirection doesn't start with force. It starts with seeing. Most people think action creates clarity, that once you do the right thing, the path will feel obvious. But that's backwards. Clarity changes action, not by pressure, but by inevitability. Think of a time you suddenly saw a truth you couldn't unsee, a relationship dynamic, a flaw in your logic. You didn't need discipline after that. You didn't need motivation. Your behavior shifted because pretending not to notice became uncomfortable. Awareness did the work. You've been treating awareness like background noise, but awareness is active. It's the moment when effort drops because truth becomes unavoidable. And here's the quiet relief in that. You don't need to push yourself into a different life. You need to stop standing so close to your thoughts that you confuse them for commands. Notice how often you wait for internal permission. I'll act when I feel ready. I'll move when I'm confident. Those statements feel responsible, but they assume something dangerous. That readiness is a prerequisite. The truth is gentler. Readiness doesn't arrive and then invite movement. Readiness forms once movement has already begun. Not dramatic movement, just the internal shift from waiting to witnessing. When you stop demanding certainty from yourself, pressure dissolves. And when pressure dissolves, your awareness sharpens. You start noticing what actually pulls you forward instead of what you think should. You see the cost of delay without shaming yourself for it. You feel friction without labeling it as danger. That's not motivation. That's alignment beginning to reassert itself. This is where identity quietly changes, not from someone who needs fixing to someone who grinds harder, but from someone trapped inside self-management to someone standing just far enough back to see clearly. From that position, you don't need pep talks. You trust yourself again because you're no longer arguing with yourself. You were never broken. You were just standing in the wrong place. Too close to the noise, too convinced that force was the answer. Step back, not to escape responsibility, but to let clarity do what pressure never could. By now, something has settled. Not a new idea, not a solution, just a recognition you didn't have words for before. You saw yourself in the spaces between moments, in the pauses you call patience, in the comfort that never felt wrong enough to challenge. Nothing dramatic happened, but something shifted quietly. You didn't discover a flaw. You recognized the pattern. And for the first time, it didn't feel abstract. Here's the part that matters. Awareness isn't neutral. Once you see what's been happening, it stops being accidental. Waiting stops being something time does to you and becomes something you participate in. Not because you're failing, but because now, you know. And knowing changes the weight of inaction. From here on, comfort isn't invisible anymore. Delay isn't unconscious. Staying where you are has a reason, even if you never say it out loud. There's no threat in that, just clarity. Soon, there will be a small moment. Nothing important on the surface. A decision you've made 100 times before. A pause. A familiar hesitation that feels responsible, measured, reasonable. And right there, just for a second, this awareness will show up. Not loudly, not accusingly, just present. You'll feel the difference between choosing ease and choosing not to look too closely. No one else will see it. Nothing will force you either way. But you'll know what's happening while it's happening. That's the handoff. There's nothing you're required to do with this. No standard to live up to. No version of yourself to chase. Only this. What used to feel automatic is now visible. And visibility carries responsibility. Not imposed, just owned. You don't owe change. You don't owe action. But you do own the truth of your choices now. From here on, whatever you delay, you'll know exactly why.